Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Dr. Raj Balkaran is a scholar of Sanskrit narrative texts and author of The Stories Behind the Poses. He is a tutor at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies and founder of the online Indian Wisdom School, where he integrates scholarship, storytelling, and spirituality to apply ancient Indian wisdom teachings to modern life. Beyond research, speaking, and teaching, he runs a thriving one-on-one life guidance and runs transformative retreats in stunning global settings. Raj, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. It's really lovely to have some time with you. We made this happen very quickly, so thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Really looking forward.
Yeah, I know I'm personally very curious to learn a little bit more about your personal journey, which we often do here first up on the podcast, and particularly how the theme of stories and storytelling has become such a big part of your personal and professional life. As someone from Canada, but also within the Indian diaspora, I'd love to know a little bit more about, your inner connection, like your personal connection, maybe if any conflicts with your personal heritage, but also how you've gone so deeply into the scholarly realms and simultaneously working thereby to support the global yoga community through your courses, your trainings, podcasts, and your beautiful book.
Yeah, there's sort of an archaeological dig at play in the in the entity called Raj. And my family moved to Toronto when I was quite young, three-ish. And of course, this was, you know, 40 plus years ago. And so that, it was a different texture in that time, even in Toronto. And Toronto is statistically the world's most diverse city in terms of multiculturalism. That's fairly
Hmm.
integrated, but nevertheless, of course, there are pressures growing up in a different culture for a variety of reasons. And so, really, I always loved literature. I started in English literature and philosophy, English degree, hoping to be a high school teacher and maybe work my way up. I was also doing some work for the Toronto District School Board on the side, admin work. And I thought this would be great because eventually I could use some leadership skill and be administration for the board and still have a hand in education. That was the dream job. And after a couple of years, I left university. There were a variety of pressures, and my heart wasn't really in it. And then it was a time, I don't know, 20, 22 years ago, where I was really spiritual seeking. It's interesting because I had sort of a Western mind with Indian DNA and an Indian heritage, and I was seeking. And I started doing morning practice. I found a book on mantras, and I was, engaged in some mantras. And I discovered the day it started an introductory Hinduism course at the University of Toronto in 2004, I think it was. And that course changed my life because from that course, I not only began my academic path, I finished my BA, did a master's half time, ended up doing a PhD in the field, etc. But also, the woman who was supposed to teach the course was pregnant, and the sessional instructor filling in was good friends with a woman at a yoga studio.
Huh.
And at that yoga studio, there was a gentleman named Mantriji, we called him Mantriji, who taught at that studio. And he ended up being my spiritual master. Actually, there's some connections. I took a quick look at the guest list on your podcast, and various other people on the podcast have a connection to this cave dwelling master in Toronto named Mantriji. Swoboda has worked with him here and there. I've seen him at satsangs over the years. There was another individual, I think, who was part of that lineage. But so that day changed my life because I found my academic path, my spiritual path unwittingly. And, I naturally gravitated towards studying narrative, studying story. My intrigue with the Valmiki Ramayana, the story of Rama
Mm.
and his exile and his would be coronation. What the heck's going on here? Why are we applauding this? He's behaving like a sage, but then everybody suffers. What kind of king are you? What kind of leader are you? I mean, maybe Lakshmana is right. What are you doing? But no, 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 no. Who am I to argue with destiny? And his brother's like, we make our own destiny, bro. What's the matter with you? You're a king. Well, like, no, 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 no. I'm like, what's going on here? So I was called to make sense of this, and this is what I did for my master's work at the University of Toronto. And it took me a while to realize that, you know, that English literature, history, philosophy love didn't go anywhere. It just took an Indic inflection through religious studies because I could not study English literature, philosophy, history really, but for through the lens of religious studies and the study of religion. And so it took me a while to realize that I love narrative, I love story.
Mm-hmm.
But my a way of being for me is decoding the story that we're living. Even working with people one on one, it's just in the blink of an eye showing them the story they're living, and whether they're authoring it or someone else is authoring it. In the blink of an eye, showing the power of storytelling for sci-fi fantasy or for ancient Indian myth, and really, to my mind, story narrative is the matrix of meaning that powers the human experience. The human experience is a storied experience, and it took me some time to realize consciously that this was just a way of being for me.
Mm, that's incredible. Yeah. And so now you're based in Canada, but obviously doing so much online. You're doing so much,
Uh,
so many incredible
um,
things.
well, I am based in Toronto. I do teach online. I started teaching online, and if you can believe it, picture this: teaching online out of my home office on Zoom in 2017.
Oh.
Yeah, a 3 year head start. So when the pandemic hit, I was getting knocks on my door from fellow platform runners and even academics, at the University of Toronto. Hey, Raj, do you know that strange online education thing you're doing? We have to do it now
Yeah.
too. Can you help me get set up and this and this? And so I went from a cynic because I was so old fashioned and I was so spoiled with parampara from one to the other, having
Right.
personal in-person training, being an old-fashioned kind of, face-to-face
Yeah.
handshake kind of fellow. That was my life. But really being a cynic about whether or not that could be efficacious online, it ended up being a profound opportunity to translate all of the connecting and interpersonal skills to the online medium. And we have connections that are incredible with among students and between myself and students, and people's lives have been utterly transformed. And really, so much, tradition teaches that Shakti or energy can be transmitted in three ways. One is through darshana, through sight. One is through shabda, through sound, and one is through sparsha, through touch.
Hmm.
Other than touch, the other two means are fully available for transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from being a cynic to really now being, I suppose, I might say an expert or seasoned in the realm of online education. I teach online at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, and I founded my own online wisdom school, the Indian Wisdom School, in 2021. And I teach courses at brilliant platforms such as Yogic Studies, more of an academic platform, and other places I get asked to do a lot of online Hindu studies education for yoga teacher trainings and this and that. But it's fascinating because it's all based from this corner of my home office in Toronto that you're seeing in me now, and that you're seeing in me now. This is where it all happens: all the coaching, all the teaching, all the speaking. In recent years, I've started traveling post COVID to cater to people who really want in person connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I host some retreats and some trainings in person, various sites on the globe. Really, I mean, this is apurvata. It's unprecedented that these karmas can be exhausted. People in so many cities. I have soul connection in so many cities. And I remember Mantriji years ago, I was in satsang. This must have been 15 years ago easily. And there was this gentleman, a student of his student, one of his famous astrological students, had many students who would come and have his darshan. And he was from America. And you know, Americans have some consciousness about Canada, but it tends to be sort of this thing that's off their radar. Um, and so he said, I think quite innocently, but he said, Mantriji, why are you here? Why are you in Canada? Why don't you come to New York or Los Angeles? Kind of like where the action's at. And without in the blinking of an eye, Mantriji said, all of my students are in Toronto. All of my students are coming to Toronto. What would I do in America? So the idea that the prarabdha, the ripening of the karma, was destined for Toronto.
Mm.
And that's where we all came to meet. So none of us are from Toronto. We all met in Toronto. And yet, in this day and age, a generation later, geographical location is not a limitation to
Hmm.
impactful transmission and relationship. And so I find myself really innovating in terms of Parampara 2.0. What does it look like
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
modern remote times?
It's really interesting, and I can relate to this sort of skepticism or cynicism about like online stuff. Years ago, I felt the same way about, on online teacher trainings and things like that. And now many people are doing hybrids. I definitely still feel there's a degree from the practicality perspective that needs to be done in person, but to be able to deliver a portion of that online, I think is can be very effective and supportive and conducive to people's lives. But everything you've shared just highlights how the positive or the upside to the pandemic and whatnot is that you've been able to reach and touch lives of people that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to. And I know personally I've been on the receiving end of so many teachers who brought things online, especially with young children. I can't travel and do all these things so easily these days, or let alone so frequently. And it's just such a blessing. And yeah, I love that whole 2.0 like idea of like, how can we do this, but do it, of course, with integrity and retain much of that essence of that traditional kind of relationship, which is,
Yeah, what you say is so important because to my mind, there are stringent traditionalists. So there's a temple that I visit about an hour north of Toronto, and in the smaller city called Richmond Hill. It's the Richmond Hill Hindu temple that's 40 to 50 years old, which
mm-hmm.
is quite old for North
Yeah,
America,
yeah.
frankly. Um, and it's a very powerful space, and they have traditional South Indian Brahmins. If I need a fire ritual done,
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to perform rituals certainly, and I do on a semi-regular basis. But if I need a proper ritual done, there are gentlemen there who have been holding. They and their families have been holding the lineage for centuries at least. And so this is a very traditional, this is an example of traditional, stringent, sort of to the point of almost exclusivity, but they're preserving that for the sake of sharing what they're preserving
Mm-hmm.
with others. There's no discrimination in terms of who can sponsor a ritual or who can attend the temple. So there's a traditionalist path, and then there's the path of the innovator. And the path of the innovator, it's a very challenging path. It's for people like this fellow named Raj who wish to leverage the power and the integrity of tradition,
Mm-hmm.
but adapt it to our times. And we live in extraordinarily transformational times. Never before have Homo sapiens have to learn to be a globe or encounter every creed and culture and food and ideas from across the world. And so I take it upon myself to do what I can to innovate student teacher relationships, innovate traditional storytelling, innovate the power of Indic philosophy in a manner befitting the texture of our times. It's not for everyone, but the innovator has to be very conscious regarding the extent to which um, steering clear of innovation becoming bastardization or degradation.
Yeah.
So preserving the power, preserving the ethos, preserving the integrity, but creatively transforming the packaging and the sort of the application, we can say.
That resonates so much. I love that. Yeah, that's really steeped in integrity, and especially for storytelling, when there's still that capacity for oral tradition, for communication, even to listen to you and hear the tone of your voice and hear your expression, and it makes me think back to when I was a kid and you used to get like CDs in the mail and just the delight in being able to just sit and listen. There's been that kind of technology for a while now. It's just kind of jumped up a notch, let's say. But sort of speaking, let's go into storytelling a little bit. I'd love to know, aside from particularly in, let's say, yoga land, this yoga context, aside from those most commonly loved and studied, cherished stories like Bhagavad Gita, Devi Mahatmayam, I'd love to know what you personally feel is like a lesser known either story or text that conveys its teachings through story that you feel is of really great relevance and value to any serious student, teacher of yoga, and why that would be.
Yeah, it seems to me that Indic soil, which is now global soil, but Indic soil is a storied soil. Like any civilization, it's really the stories that are told en masse that are the tissues of the ethos of the consciousness of a civilization, and those stories are often unconscious. And so one internalizes ideas and ideals from the stories they've heard, and do not even realize that they take it for granted until they fly to a very different part of the world and they experience something called culture shock, which means really, wow, they have a very different story universe there than we
Yeah,
have.
yeah. It's
That's what
interesting.
culture shock is. And so the storied soil of ancient India is rich. And so the epics. So right now I'm teaching a course on the Mahabharata at the online school called Mahabharata Morality. And the Mahabharata is laden with tales within tales within tales. And the
Mm-hmm.
Puranas, there are 18 Mahapuranas, rich, 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 and extraordinary vignettes in the epics and the Puranas. But what comes to mind is actually a story that we find in the Upanishads. In the Upanishads, stories are everywhere and frame narratives are everywhere. So, one of the most poignant features of Indic text is that they're not text in the way
Yeah, yeah.
that in the West there's a text. They're always in a context, even in the actual text. So and so meet so and ask a question, and the answer is this. It's never like once upon a time, ex nihilo. It's always an embodied response, even within the text. Within the text, we see the context of storytelling because the tale isn't told without someone asking a question, even within the text.
Mm.
And so there is this beautiful storied pedagogy that really exalts and celebrates embodiment because a text can be disembodied. But when it's told and heard, then there's a level of embodiment. So certainly, while the Upanishads do not prioritize narrative in the same way as they do discourse, they certainly prioritize frame narratives and embodied settings. And what comes to mind is an ancient tale from the Chandogya Upanishad. So once there was this great teacher, Uddalaka Arun, and he has a little son. He has many students, and one of the students is his little son. As you can imagine, perhaps the son is a little bit um, indulged, Shvetaketu. And so he keeps him at home, and it's all homeschooling then, right? And so Shvetaketu comes of age. He's at that special age, 12, 13-ish, where we have all of these rites of passage, like a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, like a communion, like, it's a thread tying in Indic culture. He's of age. And he's like, you've got to go off and find yourself, go off and study, find yourself a proper school. We've got a catalog here with all the Ivy League gurukulas. Go off and find yourself, pick one that you like and go study in. And this was the custom. So he goes away. These are cycles of 12. 12 years is one orbit of Jupiter, actually. Jupiter Guru. The Graha Guru takes 12 years to orbit. So that's part of the symbology of these stories. So for the first orbit of Jupiter, he's with his father, learning. And then for the second cycle of 12, he's away studying with a teacher. So now he's 24, young man, indulge, and now Ivy League educated, coming back home to his father to show off how much he learned. His father had more than knowledge. His father had wisdom. His father could see that this boy needs to learn more than biology and philosophy and mathematics. This boy needs to learn humility. And this boy needs to learn what is what. So his father says, my goodness, look at your degrees. Look at your, look at these institutions. Surely you are well learned. But tell me something. Tell me something, Shweta. Anything, father. I've learned it all. Tell me something. Did they teach you? Did they teach you about that whereby the unheard becomes heard? Did they teach you about that whereby non-thought becomes thought, whereby the unknown becomes known? So Shweta is scratching his head. And he's like, what do you, what? Maybe, I didn't, I didn't join the fraternity, so I attended all my classes. I'm not sure. Maybe what are you talking about, father? And he goes on and he says, you see that banyan tree over there? Yes, father. Pluck a fruit and bring me the fruit. Yes, father, here's the fruit. Cut it in half. Here it is, father. What do you see, son? I see seeds. Pluck a seed from the fruit. Yes, father. Here's a seed. Cut it in half. Here, father, I've cut it in half. What do you see, son? Nothing. From that seeming nothingness in the seed emerges the entire banyan. From the subtleness of what is in the seed, the banyan emerges. Did they not teach you these mysteries, son? Did they not teach you about the unseen? Did they not teach you these things? And so the tale is much more complex and more formulaic, where, there are other vignettes where he's like, bring me a jug of water. Here you go, Father. Bring me some salt. Here you go, Father. Put the salt in the water. Here you go, Father. Let's come back tomorrow. Okay, where's the salt? It's gone, Father. Sip from the top. What do you taste? Salt. Sip from the bottom. What do you taste? Salt. Sip from the side. What do you taste? Salt. Salt is there, although it does not appear to be there. And so too is Brahman. So too is consciousness. So too is that source, subtly abiding in all things, like salt dissolved in water. Did they not teach you this, Shvetaketu? No, Father. Will you teach me? Yes, son. There's so much there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? What do you think,
I
Amy?
love it. It reminds me of that sort of idea that, you've got a gold bangle and it's like, is it the bangle or is it the gold? The gold is there. It's gold. It's a bangle, but it's gold. Like, the same kind of
They
idea.
use that exact metaphor in the Chandogya Upanishad,
Right.
talking about gold itself, or copper as well, I believe. And his idea is that, well, you could dissolve the bangle and then make something else. Is it the same thing or is it a different thing? It's the idea that there is this unified essence manifests in the multiplicity filled world that we perceive.
It's incredible. And actually, yeah, so I would love to unpack and unravel this a little bit more with you. It kind of perfectly segues and leads into where I was going to go with you next. And, given that many of the stories, the Hindu stories of India require a lot of contemplation, and they often hold really subtle insights that I suppose traditionally they would be decoded by the teacher. What is it that you feel is so profoundly illuminating about these? They're old, but they're timeless myths. And I'm always hesitant to personally use the word myth because it kind of implies a falsehood. And in whether or not you believe that these stories literally happened at some point in time or in some other realm or not, they do hold underlying truth. So, I'd love to know what it is that you personally feel makes these stories so timeless, profound, nourishing, and thereby invaluable to all.
One of the consequences of our modern secular world is either the dispensation with or the demonization of divinity, spirituality, religiosity, and oftentimes for good cause, because there certainly is a shadow to every tradition, and oftentimes throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so, classically, religious notions such as myth is pejorative. Your daily ritual now is Starbucks, not lighting a candle before Mother Mary. A cult following, although it's a technical religious studies term, in terms of the cult of Durga, the cult of Ganesha, the cult of Jesus of Nazareth. It now has this other
Mm.
connotation of someone following blindly who has been manipulated, in a sense. And so we have in modern vernacular the word myth, just as yoga in modern English means postures to most people. Myth means, well, that's a myth. Santa Claus isn't real. That it's a myth that all women are like this, or
Yeah.
what have you.
Mm.
And yet, if we take a step back in terms of the word mythology, mythology, to my mind, um, pertains to stories which are spiritually true.
Mm-hmm.
The question of their historical veracity, to my mind, is incommensurate with the work of myth. The historical veracity of whether or not Yahweh parted the Red Sea so that the ancient Israelites may have dry land to walk upon, that is 1/10 at best. Probing that is 1/10 of the measure and the power of the narrative. They are desert people. They are hydrophobic. Their desert father gives them dry land in the middle of a body of water. He doesn't give them canoes. He doesn't get any life jackets. He parts the feminine, the water element, because he is a masculine entity in the mythological universe that exalts the masculine as not only supreme but exclusive, as the fount of divine power. So all emblems of the feminine are set aside, and all feminine actors are subjugated, whether Eve being the cause of the fall because of her temptation, whether Sarah laughing in Yahweh's face, how will I be the mother of nations, Lord? I'm 90 years old, that ship has sailed. And Yahweh says, what's too difficult for me? There's profundity in that, whether or not Abraham decided to whip it out and circumcise himself as part of a blood contract with a desert deity named Yahweh. That is not the power. The power is in the story world that's being propagated and the values in that story world. Whether or not Moses communed with a burning bush, whether or not historically, there's great power in that narrative. There's great power in the narrative of the divine in flesh, a charioteer, an aristocrat bro, manifesting in the middle of the Kurukshetra, at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, the dawn of the darkest age, the most cataclysmic war of all time is about to be fought, and God shows himself to his devotee and cousin Arjuna so as to whack some sense into him. Extraordinary power there. Whether or not the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons, Daenerys Stormborn, emerged from the fire unscathed, having birthed 3 dragons from fossilized eggs. See, in that case, we know that an individual and their imagination channel this narrative, but it's extraordinarily powerful. What do you do when you're afraid of a bully? Do you let them bully you, like the Balrog tried to do to Gandalf? Or do you take a stand on the bridge of Khazad-dûm and say, nope, you shall not pass? What do? Do you set a boundary and remember that there is a higher power and that you too are the servant of the secret fire? And you could set that boundary? What do you do? So mythological stories, whether modern sci-fi fantasy, let's not forget that George Lucas could not have completed A New Hope without the work of Joseph Campbell, who read every mythological story he can get his hands on to distill the hero's journey, with which Lucas reverse engineered one of the greatest myths of our time. So whether or not it's sci-fi fantasy or Hebrew Bible or Devi Mahatmya or Bhagavad Gita or the Son of God who walked on water, the power is in the story world. The power is not in the world behind the text. The power is in the world within the text and the ways in which the text can massage consciousness, can exalt consciousness. That is the power of myth. Yes. I believe there was more to your question, but now all I'm seeing is Daenerys flying over top
No,
of a
no,
dragon. So,
no, no, that's incredible. Like that, no, that resonates. And yes, and I particularly at the end there, that articulation that landed, like, yes.
so now I recall, what you said at the outset pertained to myth being pejorative word, and I really need to set the record straight on that. But if I'm not
Yeah, yeah.
mistaken, what you said thereafter was what had to do with decoding the truth therein.
Yes.
And could you re-articulate the question on that?
So,
So I can...
given that, and you spoke to this already, that the word myth can imply or suggest falsehood, but regardless of if the stories are, believed to be literal or happen at some point in history, regardless of that, there is eternal truths in there. But I guess in addition to that, what it is that you personally feel is the most valuable aspect of story. I think that it can drive or clarify understandings, fundamental understandings like karma and dharma and these deeper teachings. So yeah, I'd love to know, at least just directly through your perspective, what you think they really hold. I mean, there's so much, obviously, but what is it that, especially to that Western mentality, by being steeped in story, what do you personally feel is what makes them so timeless, but so also so nourishing?
One of the means whereby we absolutely excel in our culture, in our civilization, in our times, has to do with information. We find information in the palm of our hand. And information is processed intellectually, if we're lucky. And this is important, but this is half of the equation. We will loosely call this the functioning of the left brain. The functioning of the right brain, especially in tandem with the left brain, has to do not with information, but with transformation. Information can be experienced or stored by a computer. Transformation most certainly cannot. And so the human experience has to do with growth, evolution, transformation. It has to do with being on a journey, not being on a trip. When one is on a trip, one knows the destination and approximately how long it'll take to get there, especially with Google Maps in Palm. When one is on a journey, one is not sure what that destination quite looks like. And one is open to the twists and turns and the whim of fate in all of its cruelty and glory alike. And so, story is a journey. Stories are building blocks for the various journeys that human beings find themselves on. And when a story takes you on a journey that resonates, you will watch and rewatch, read and reread, consume and reconsume, and chew your cud as much as you'd like. And if you're lucky, you'll get milk or cream or butter or ghee from the chewing. You've got four stomachs, especially. But the idea of spoiler, it's a ludicrous idea, born of a linear mentality. Now that I know the ending, this is ruined. No, you know how A New Hope's going to end. You know that Luke destroys Death Star, but you experience triumph every time he does, because the story is taking you on a journey. It's curating consciousness. So the power of story in general, especially mythological stories, perhaps even especially Indic myth, but not necessarily, is the power to move consciousness along on a journey towards life lessons and ultimately towards realizations. This is the power of story.
Mm-hmm. I really look forward to going back and re-listening to this, because you said something earlier, essentially the same thing. I can't remember exactly how you said it, but you implied like massaging consciousness or something. And I was like, oh, yes, I really felt that. I really, really felt that. That just really dropped in and landed for me. I love the way
So
that
your
you
consciousness
articulate.
was your consciousness was massaged, as I use the term.
Yeah. But it made sense to me. Like, and again, I think that as those of us, when as Westerners, our brain, we can sometimes struggle to find language to articulate these sorts of things, and yeah, articulate the experience of them and what's happening. And you've just done that so beautifully in a way that it's like, yes, you've put language around that kind of experience that I think is very challenging to describe. Yeah, which is wonderful. So thank you. And I would love to hone in on you now a little bit and really speak to the driving inspiration and vision behind creating your book. So the stories behind the poses, which has been a really incredible resource, particularly for yoga practitioners and teachers. What was it that you felt was lacking that inspired the work? What would be your guidance specifically to teachers who wish to bring the stories and the myths into their classes, the philosophy into their classes, especially because most teachers are obviously teaching modern postural yoga. And sometimes there is a difficulty in understanding how to sort of amalgamate these stories, deeper teachings, and present them through the more, modern physical application of yoga.
So it appears that there are many hats that Raj wears. So sometimes he's researching and writing, typically academic research. Sometimes he's speaking, sometimes he's interviewing or appearing on podcasts, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes engaged in one-on-one life counsel, life guidance, sort of spiritual life coaching work. It took him some time to realize that all of the hats had one thing in common. They were on the head of a teacher, one who enjoys teaching, teaching in terms of the acquisition and dissemination of knowledge, but more importantly, teaching in terms of learning about oneself, how life works, mysteries of life. And so teaching is deeply fulfilling. And so in 2020, um, thanks to a gentleman named Seth Powell, who's a relatively recent graduate of um, Harvard Divinity School, um, uh, there's a platform called Yogic Studies. I'm a huge fan of his from day one because, to my mind, this is the future of the humanities, especially if the academy is not replacing or continuing positions. People like he and I and others need to find a way to do what we're here to do, and without the rat race begging bowl for these adjunct positions. But so we have a platform called Yogic Studies, and a student reached out and say, "Do you know Seth Powell?" And I vaguely remember the name. I think from some conference years before. I wasn't quite sure what she was driving at. I emailed him, and then I looked at this platform like, "Oh, we're both online educators, perfect." And he's like, "Yeah, we'd love for you to do this course called Yoga and Hindu Mythology. Well, we've had many requests for it. But we've been waiting for the right person, and apparently now is the time." I'm like, "Cool." So this is 2020, end of 2020, end of the world, right? So we're doing. So I taught a course called Yoga and Hindu Mythology for reasons not entirely clear, but not through anything that I'm doing. The vast majority of my students are teachers. The vast majority,
Yeah.
teachers, coaches, healers. So people who are a big spoon in their tribe, they need to come to a big spoon every once in a while and be a small spoon so they can be supported and nourished and learning.
Absolutely.
95% of all students are that without any kind of targeting whatsoever. So it was a wonderful student in that class. Her name is Amparo Rodriguez. I believe she's in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. And she has a tribe of her own. So some of the stories she learned, she told the stories to her tribe of yogis. One of them worked at a publishing house. And this publishing house specialized in illustrated books for adults. Not quite coffee table books, but something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And that publishing house contacted Dr. Raj a couple months later, beginning of 2021, and said, "Hey, would you like to write a book on the stories behind the yoga poses? We think this is a great idea." Okay, well, this wasn't the book I had intended to write this year, but I can feel an opportunity that's very, very meaningful because this is coming from the context of teaching and student curriculum and student needs. Students want this resource. So, yes, I'll make the time, I'll make the space, I'll do whatever we need to do, I'll jump through the hoops. Let's do it. So, the book was an evolution thanks to some wonderful, wonderful guidance and vision from the editor, Chloe Murphy, who asked me out of the gate, "Hey, I need 5 stories up front. Okay, what for? I want to share them with potential illustrators. Okay, what for? Well, I want to see who's going to do the best job of bringing them to life." And this brilliant, brilliant figure named Devika Menon, who's talented. I think she's in Dubai. But she just channeled this sort of unique style for the book. And the book is visually stunning. Nothing that I can take credit for. It's visually stunning. And as an auditory learner, I'm very well aware of visual learners, and I always include slides, etc. It never dawned on me to have illustrations in this book, and I see the value now of having illustrations to help bring them to life. And so the book stems directly from my teaching, and it is an offering to my students. Moreover, it is an offering to any yoga practitioner or Indophile who wants to be a student of the rich narrative traditions of ancient India and what to do with them. Now, what do you do with them? I mean, this will vary from teacher to teacher. I do have a course at the Indian Wisdom School on the stories, but actually, no, I have 5, actually, one for each chapter, because there's 5 chapters of the book. But there's one companion course called The Stories Behind the Poses, which tries to answer that and says, "Hey, here are some strategies. Here are ways you can use them." Um, uh, and so what comes to mind is it all depends on your students, right? You are cooking based on their dietary needs and their appetite. Sometimes they don't know what they like. Sometimes the kids don't know what they'll like, and you put a little something on the pizza and they end up liking it, you know. But oftentimes you have to be mindful of their dietary needs. And so assigning the stories outside of class might be an interesting way to go, because there's not a person who reads carefully the story who doesn't experience a shift in the asana when they do it. Because the asana is about an experience and the story is about an experience. And understanding, for example, the story behind warrior pose will infinitely enrich your experience, your embodied experience of warriors one, two, and three, and understanding which points of the story of Virabhadra, this wrathful form of Shiva, this is, and why. And so telling the story in class, either in Shavasana or at the outset of class, focusing on a pose or two from the story, assigning it outside of class. There are various strategies that one can try. Let me think. If anybody is interested in that, there's a there is a all access free trial. You could actually have it free. Just sign up on the school website for the free trial and check out the course completely free of cost
Yeah, wow.
in wisdomschool.com.
Great.
Um, but yeah, it's a good question. I think we are all co-creating the application of story within yoga. I do want to say that recently I did a retreat in Los Angeles, and it was just lovely experience. I mean, sort of discovered a soul family out there. And one of the women in the retreat, her name is Bianca. She is an aerialist. She used to be in the circus. She literally used to be in the circus, Cirque du Soleil. So I just started chatting with her, and I thought, I've got to come back. So I came back a month later, a couple of weeks ago, and as I was telling the story of the descent of the Ganges or Tadasana, she literally enacted the descent of the Ganges. And then she led a class with her students focusing on Tadasana. We were sort of experimenting on the application for this. And then I came in towards the end to share some additional teachings. And according to the students, it was quite transformative and powerful for them. So I myself am learning the applications of the
Yeah.
stories behind the poses.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting, and I think also too, just going back to something you mentioned at the start, I think yes, first and foremost, it's important to understand the environment, the students, the studio, and the regularity of students and their exposure to yoga just in general, whether that's asana and or beyond. But it really, your words made me reflect on how quite often we don't need to necessarily explain things to our students, but when we are steeped in something ourselves, whether it's a physical practice and or philosophical studies or what have you, it's naturally going to inform how we share, what we share, even if we're not quite literally talking about why we're doing it or what the story is. It's just that the energetics of that study and that studentship is just naturally going to inform what we're going to share with our students anyway. So that personal study, and I think I'm just unraveling this in my own mind. The personal study of stories. We read a lot of Hindu stories to our children. We've got the whole comic series and so forth, and I love it. But yeah, I think it's plucking out, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier, plucking out those deeper teachings sort of that are hidden in there, the deeper layers of meaning, and let that come through without necessarily feeling like you have to tell a story, which you might tell a story. Maybe you're doing a series of classes or a workshop over the course of a few weeks, and I can imagine that would be relevant to telling the story itself and then letting that unfold through the physical delivery of the practice or physical experience. Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely something to kind of ponder and even workshop with oneself. But it's an incredible resource that you've provided, and yes, beautiful visually, which makes it even more accessible, I think.
Thank you. It was, what can I say? It was someone knocked on my door and said, "Would you write this book?" And I thought, sure, this is an opportunity to teach about these stories and how they're connected. Sure. And it sort of manifested and took on a life of its own. And it really feels like, as any parent knows, this soul just wanted to be here and you were just the instrument of it.
Oh, everything you share
What
just seems so like dharmic, like you are just being pushed along this path and it's all unfolding so beautifully. That's how it
I'm a
appears.
hologram. um, no, but it really feels very much, even more so than the academic books. The two academic books. It really feels very strongly like it is a book that desired to come into being for a greater purpose.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, I have to give Raj credit for his training and his storytelling chops and all that. But nevertheless, it's like children. Yes, of course, it's your DNA, it's your womb, it's your caregiving. But no, they're just
You, yeah,
you're
you're
just
the
like
vessel.
you're just yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And with the stories behind the poses, it feels that way, and it because it's not something that I envision. I'm so in it, speaking and teaching about story. I've been doing for close to 20 years, but I really was not able to see being so in it. I could not see that this was so novel and so I wasn't able to perceive that it didn't dawn on me that a book such as this needed to exist because I was too in it to see it.
Yeah.
But as soon as someone pointed out we need this book, I'm like, okay, I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. Okay, here's this book, and here are these teachings, and here's ways in which there are many for whom yoga is asana, wonderful. There are many for whom yoga is a path of waking up, wonderful. And then there's in between, how do I manage my stress? How do I become more spiritual? How do I learn about, all the topics I teach about the school, karmic theory, the goddess, how do I enrich my life? How do I advance my journey? How do I engage the transformative power of these teachings without any need for dogma or sectarian divides or conversions? And so that's where I live. It's like my job is to create the Indian buffet according to people's dietary needs and tastes, and you take away what will nourish you. That's my job, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, would you mind sharing with us as we come to a close here what you might have coming up in the way of courses, offerings, whether online or in person? And please share website, best place to send people on social media, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say for this audience, I'd say the space that you'll find probably the most resonant is at the Indian Wisdom School, indianwisdomschool.com. There's a completely free trial for 14 days. Oh, there are a number of courses on the goddess, on karmic theory, on mantra, you name it. And also, there's a super exciting roster of courses coming out for next year on practicing Shakti mantras, on various deities. And so I think that'll be a great place for you to study if you'd like with me at the online school. If you're interested in the larger mission, like the academic pieces and the podcasts and things that I do, then rajbalkaran.com is sort of the table of contents for everything I do. If you're more on the academic, nerdy side, I have a podcast on the New Books Network called Indian Religions, where I've interviewed hundreds of scholars on their various new books in the field. And I also created the Indian Wisdom podcast that's not behind a paywall because I want to share these teachings, whether you can, afford to pay for a course or not.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe check out the podcast Indian Religions for the nerdy stuff, or the Indian Wisdom podcast for the more spiritual stuff. Similarly, rajbalkaran.com for my sort of CV site, and indianwisdomschool.com for the sort of hybrid spiritual scholarly education that I offer. If you're into social media, then we're on Insta and Facebook at Indian Wisdom School. Um, yeah, and in terms of in-person offerings, let's see, Hawaii retreat, March
Nice.
2025. I'll be in New York in April. I'll be in a couple of American cities, including Cleveland in June. Probably will be in Paris at some point later in the year. But just if you want to stay in the know about all that, then maybe join the newsletter at Indian Wisdom School, and then you'll get all the updates and all that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, and
I
we
think
hope,
that's
hope we
about
we hope
it.
we can get you back out to Australia sometime soon too. That would be really
Oh
nice.
yeah, oh yeah. I would love to. I'm in conversation even with another woman who interviewed me, another Australian, another really engaging host, much as yourself, interviewed me, Lauren Toburn, a
Yes,
couple
Lauren. Yeah.
weeks ago, and I think she's even appeared on your podcast if I glanced correctly, and very much want to come back out and do a retreat in Byron Bay.
Mm.
Um, I strongly suspect it'll be 2025. I'm just sort of looking at a couple places and timing and all that. And I had such a great time in Australia. I can't tell you for so many reasons, and I'd be delighted to come back. And also, listen, I mean, well, look, I've got tons of students in Australia, and so should they all take a flight to Toronto, or should I just fly to Australia, right?
Come on down. We'd love to have you here. That would be really nice. And yeah, I just want to also say that I really love both the podcasts, like the Indian Wisdom School. I loved the Diwali episode recently. Really beautiful. Love the stories. And I find they're kind of really short and sweet and just easily digestible, but really enriching, really just sweet episodes to listen to. And I've experienced a lot of just nourishment from tuning in, but also the New Books Network, the specific one that you're engaged in with the Indian religions. I find that really captivating as well, and it also brings to my awareness certain books and texts that I may not have otherwise found. I mean, I'm not a scholar, I'm not involved in anything like that, but I have the brain that's really interested in that sort of stuff. And so for me, I find that podcast, and I've only actually realized that exists not too long ago, but I found it's a really great resource, like for my brain and that interest, without having to go deeply into that world
I'm
necessarily.
I'm I'm not surprised because it has a shockingly large audience. Now, there are scholars and grad students and certainly, but there are so many lay folks who are indophiles or intellectuals or some combination. And it took me a while to realize, but the sweet spot among my students are people like you who are super smart and super spiritual. So it's not that people who are super spiritual but not interested and are capable of critical thinking, they're generally not for me, or vice versa. It's not the super smart intellectuals who are reductionistic in a sense or disembodied in a sense, but it's like people who like really want to nerd out, but they also really want to have embodied spiritual experience, and that
Mm,
seems to be the sweet spot of the frequency of the I imagine for both of us of whom we attract.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I'm just going to be cheeky here and ask you one more quick thing. I noticed on your website that you've got a couple more books in progress. Is that
I
true?
do. I do. They're academic books. I mean, I'm not adverse
That's
to writing
okay.
another public book, but I have a brand new translation of a text called the Devi Mahatmya, which was the text upon which I dissertated in my PhD work. It is a radical and beautiful text where it's the first time in the Indic world we see a divine mother, not a goddess, like a consort goddess or a nature goddess, but like God's a she, by the way. Yeah, so it's a very powerful text,
Yes.
and so I have a brand new translation of it that's literally been sitting on my desk for 2 years. So I need to tweak some of the grammar and please the grammar police. But more importantly, I want to please the poetry police. I want to please the,
Right.
the English ear. So sometimes when you hear Sanskrit translations in English, your ear hurts a little bit, bleeds a little bit. I don't want any of that. I want it to sound beautiful in English. That's my goal. And then there is the Mahabharata. I mean, the Mahabharata is just beyond in some of its storytelling. So there's a Mahabharata project on the back burner as well. There's quite a few articles on the goddess in my brain to kind of churn out. Um, and you know what I really would like to do, actually, if there's interest out there, if there's maybe a publisher listening, I would love to do not quite a companion, but a corollary in a sense of the stories behind the poses, but having to do with astrological mythology.
Ooh,
You know,
nice.
yeah, stories of the planets and
Yes.
stories of. Yeah, I think that would be lots of fun.
That sounds
Yeah.
incredible. I love that.
Oh, good.
I'd be totally down for reading that. Yeah, tell me more. Tell me more. Maybe that's something that'll actually get pushed forward like faster, If it's coming through,
Yeah,
you got to get it
yeah.
written.
So someone's gonna be in the audience here, and they're gonna like knock on my door in a month and say, "Hey, would you like to write this book?"
Yes.
And I'll make
I
sure.
hope so. I hope so. Actually, that reminds me too. I noticed on your website that you facilitate online kind of, I don't know what the right language would be, like modules and stuff for teacher training programs. So if there's anyone out there listening that facilitates
Yes,
teacher trainings,
absolutely.
then maybe they can reach out to you as well for.
I feel free to reach out. So I get so there are at least a dozen in the last year or two um uh YTTs where they have thought, hey, why don't we have Raj come in and do the mythology and philosophy unit? Um and so typically online, although a couple of them have been in person. Um and whether or not you'd like me to personally do that, if you're looking for resources, by all means, get in touch, and I could point you to what might work or what may be of use, or maybe even grant you access to some of the resources from the Indian Wisdom School, whatever
Mm,
works. But it's really it's um it's about the transformation. It's about these times that we're in. that are extraordinarily transformative on every level, as we can all feel. That's why it's so difficult to navigate and so important that we have some kind of grounding and centering and spiritual practice in these times, but also wittingly or unwittingly, we are creating the triage centers for what's coming. We are creating the safe spaces and the healing methodologies and the sort of the sanity checks for what's coming. And so it's super important that we get the knowledge and the people in the right places. And this is slow burning work. So if anybody out there could use any support, teaching or yoga tribe, whether from me personally or just want to be pointed to some resources, by all means, get in touch. Maybe rajbalkaran.com. There's a contact form there. That may be the easiest way.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you so very much for your time. You are very captivating and just have this beautiful way of expressing, which of course you do, given your line of work and everything that you're creating and putting out.
Oh, come on. There's lots of boring academics.
Yeah, but
No,
no, but
teasing.
I'm you. Like yeah, but it's not just academic work. It's that and it's beyond. You've taken that to like this really beautiful place, and I'm just so grateful, and it's been really lovely. I feel like you're someone I could definitely listen to, all day long. Just take us into the stories and take us into the stories within the stories, and it's really wonderful. And yeah, tremendously grateful for your time today.
It's been my pleasure. I'm so glad you reached out. And clearly, this is meant to be. It just manifested within 48 hours. Unheard of for my schedule. So voila, here we are.
Yes, absolutely. Such a blessing. If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.